So, welcome to makeup training for, of course, our test security. So, I'm going to try to go through this quickly. There's going to be some slides that are pertaining to me as a test coordinator and not to you guys as test administrators on campus. So, let's get started. So, this is our 2021-2022 test security training. All right, get to something you actually need. All right, so remember, here is the note that is most important. No matter what, you are responsible for ensuring that you read the test manuals that you've been given months ago. There are STAR training and our STAR test manuals where you read your say directions from and so on and so forth. This training was also prepared by CFISD office, and be sure that you are prepared for testing by asking questions and by doing your own reading as well. So test administrators, test security and confidentiality. Again, here you would note the test administrator manuals are the things that we need in order to stay in compliance and up to date. So test security and confidentiality. To basically sum it up, the campus principal must develop procedures to ensure security and confidentiality of the test. And then that's why the test administrators are guided by me, the test coordinator, which is then put in place by the principal. So all assessments and instruments are secure. Answer documents, booklets, and everything related to testing is secured and confidential. Failure to cooperate with different investigations if something were to occur, whether it be a cell phone, whether it be an incidence of erasing stray marks, can be result in disciplinary actions. And so everybody on campus must be trained in test security and be signed and have signed an oath, sorry. And so therefore, once this training is over and I can see and document that you've watched the training, then therefore you will have to sign an oath, and this will be done before testing. Maintaining test security and materials is important, and all these materials must be stored in a location such as our testing room. Those secure materials include, again, pre-labels, pre-coded labels. This is where all the student information is. The test booklets, STAR 02, that's life skills, and we're done with that. Completed answer documents, online assessments, online session IDs, and then everything related to TELPAS. So again, after we go through the training, you will have to come down to sign an oath so that you can document that you have been trained, and this oath stays on campus for 5 years. This is what the oath looks like, and we will go over this oath once you come down to sign it after you do your makeup training. Let's go for penalties. So invalidating students' test scores, referring certified educators to the state board, and then lowering their accreditation. So a lot of these things are things that can happen as penalties to irregularities. So any person who violates and assists a violation in terms of the test will go through an investigation. There's different things that could happen, such as placement of restrictions on your certificate, issuance of suspicion of a certificate. You can have your certificate revoked, and you can basically have restrictions and cause you to not be able to work because of these issues. So mandatory minimum sanction is 1 year suspension of an educator who is found guilty of intentionally manipulating the results or violating the security or confidentiality integrity of the test. These are different examples. There's been cases where people have been suspended for 1 year, for 2 years. Some people have had their entire license revoked, all over manipulations or cheating or suspicious activity of tests. We will not be doing this at Cook because it's not worth it. A person commits the offense, the person intentionally discloses the content. It can be also considered a misdemeanor. We don't want that. Irregularities. There's procedural irregularities, things that happen in the process of giving the test. Okay, these are minor things. They do not represent severe breaches. It is basically procedural. Accommodation errors we have, where a student was not given an accommodation, a student was given an accommodation that they should not have had, an allowable and approved accommodation was not provided. So these are accommodation errors, things that should be on your roster that you are reading and knowing that the student receives in your classroom. Accounting errors. A student was given the wrong test materials. That's why it is important for us to check for badges that day. Make sure that we have students with the same name, that we're identifying the two children in the room, being able to note that there's the wrong child sitting in our classroom. Attendance, badge checks, and student checks are very important because that erases the accountability errors. Eligibility errors. A student was administered an incorrect test, wrong level, wrong grade, wrong language. A student was administered a paper test versus an online test of the same test. A specific test was administered on an incorrect day, meaning it's science day, and a teacher gave the social studies test. That is an eligibility error, and those are things that should not be happening because we should be reading our say directions and being familiar with our rosters, which tells us what tests we are taking on that day. Continued on with eligibility errors, and then the campus fails to properly account for eligible testers. So that means there's somebody on campus that should have tested, for instance, algebra tests on a day by themselves. Let's say we have a student who is taking algebra, but they're just going along their regular schedule and we did not test them on that day that they should have tested. This is an eligibility error. Monitoring errors. So when a room is left and then the students are left unattended, they're not being monitored. For instance, the teacher picks up their bucket, takes their test materials to the room, and then students are starting to come in and the teacher's at the door and they're not paying attention to the students and the test materials, did not provide the appropriate materials to students, and they don't prepare the testing environment. Refusal to say the, not refusal, but the sense of not saying the say directions. So it's not that you refuse, but some people will skip over the say directions or, oh, this is the same old, same old. This can be considered in error as well. Do not properly complete this required seating chart. Like all of these steps that we have to take for testing is the safety of our certificates. Different monitoring areas. A test administrator did not actively monitor the students, meaning that somebody sat down the entire 4 hours. They were on their computer. They were reading a book. And so these things will constitute monitoring errors because a student may leave their answer document blank. They may not bubble. They may complete the reading test and then move on to the math or go back to math to check the work that they did the day before. It is important that we are monitoring, especially in online rooms. We want to make sure that our online testers actually submit their tests. So students need to be, you need to be monitoring and ensuring, hey, if the students said that they were done, looking to see that they have actually submitted the test. Training errors, meaning you didn't get this training. So if I allowed you to test and you did not receive a test security training or a STAR training, that could be considered an error due to training. Not having our TELPAS raters actually train before they rate the students' papers. Incidents does not constitute testing irregularity. So if the whole school lights goes out, if there is a fire drill and we need to get out of here, and so we had to leave the test materials inside of the room for that. We do not necessarily, in case of an emergency, an intruder, a fire drill or a gas leak, we don't need to collect the materials and take them outside with us. You can if you're able to do it quickly. So if you train your students, if something happens, to close their books up, bring them with them, and you're there at the door with the bucket and the students are dropping them in on the way out, and you've been that great of a test administrator, then that's okay. However, in case of an emergency, We do not need to safeguard those materials. We need to get the students out. So of course, there's always a district and a TEA monitor that comes by and they visit. So you never know if they're going to be walking by your room. You never know if they're going to be coming into your room, really, and just monitoring you and monitoring the students. So be mindful on test days, you're prone to have a visitor. Serious irregularities. These are things where people are losing their license, getting suspended, going up for the state review board. And these are things that are going to be directly related to hard penalties. Violations directly or indirectly assisting students, cheating, basically, providing help that does not constitute a part of an accommodation, tampering with their answers, erasing them, falsifying the ratings of a student who took TELPAS, viewing the material. I know some of us have oral reading. Those people are able to see that material, but it's also a harder restriction because they can't discuss those things that they have seen after that. However, if you're in a room where there is no oral administration, you should be walking and looking at tests, ensuring, hey, it's reading day, I see passages. You don't have to stand there long, and you don't have to look at the test long in order to see that someone's taking a reading test versus a math test. Talking about scores, talking about materials to your family, these are all serious violations. Duplicating or recording information, responding to secure test questions, preventing a student from participating. Receiving and providing allowable assistance during collaboration, and encouraging or assisting an individual to engage in conduct described in the items listed above. Failing to report an appropriate authority that an individual is engaged in. So another thing is knowing somebody did something wrong, knowing that you saw somebody do something that was an irregularity or a violation, and then you did not say anything. That is also violation for you. All right, failing to implement sufficient procedures. So meaning you aren't monitoring, you aren't saying say directions, you aren't calling out the reminders during testing and you didn't sustain the testing environment could be a violation. Not a testing irregularity. So call the testing office for guidance if something happens. If you determine that a student was cheating, the campus should follow the procedures. If you determine that somebody was cheating, it's not automatically a violation because you were doing your job monitoring and you caught that student. Unexpected disruption and a cell phone policy, it's a violation. And cell phones are always the hot violation because students are so attached to these phones. Some teachers believe that they can check their time on their phones for testing, and this is all wrong. Cell phones are not allowed by adults or children in a testing environment at all. I sent out this cell phone policy from the district to parents already. Student cheating can sometimes cause their test to be othered with this, which is an O, and the other is basically saying, it's not to be scored, don't score it, it's not gonna count. And what's gonna end up happening is the student is going to be considered a failure in that sense. And the other lets the district and the campus and TEA know that there was some type of violation. Students cheating, using their devices, taking pictures, texting them to another student, all of these things, the district must contact the parents immediately. I must do a report, but it is a serious violation for the student. And it's definitely if the teacher is doing their job and catching them. Investigating and reporting, everybody who is a part of an investigation or a situation, an incident, must participate. It is inside of our contract that we must participate in investigations. Refusal can constitute removal. Let's not let that happen. Campus staff should notify their test coordinator. The test coordinator will speak to the district coordinator and the principals, and we will figure out how to move forward when investigations are necessary. Be discreet. We're not going to be calling people out on the loudspeaker. It's not going to become a talk of the campus. Collect statements from staff and students, prepare a timeline of the events, and so on and so forth. Determine who is responsible for testing violations, which will be determined by myself, the district, and the principal. The report the incident as needed, not as needed, as necessary, which is all the time. Determine if the testing violation compromised the validity of the student's test. Some things can be reported, but it doesn't require the student's test to be othered. And so therefore we can move on, but all of our incidents must be reported. Statements from educators. So as you can see here, the verify each statement includes the name, title, information, the role, the description of the incident, signatures, and the date of the statement. Obtain separate typed and signed and dated statements from all the individuals. Individuals implicated in a violation should be informed of the allegations being made against them. Statements from students. I want to go back to something because this year, this was the first time in investigations and statements as it relates to adults that they're going to start asking for our social security numbers, the last 4 digits. So we also just want to be mindful of that too. Statements from students, they do not interview them, do this after they've turned in their test. Obtain the statement from a student, you cannot write for them. It must be in their own handwriting or recorded and then transcribed. The summary of the event must include all of these things listed below, but this is for me. The campus action plan. So every time we have an incident on campus, every year after, we must implement what are we going to do moving forward in order to ensure that that same incident does not continue to occur. And then there's a follow-up on what we did. If it is a serious violation, add a copy of the signed test security oath showing that the teacher, test administrator does have an oath, a copy of the seating chart, contact information for the accused individual, and again, the last 4 digits of their social security number. They can contact you over summer. And again, this shows you how serious these violations are becoming. After the incident is submitted, then we move forward dealing with the campus test coordinator, which is myself and the principal and the district. If additional actions are required, TA can send out a security team. They may email, they may call and communicate in order to wrap up an investigation. Tips to avoid test irregularities: ensure that everybody is trained, ensure that the testing rosters are accurate, complete the seating charts with great accuracy, announce the time left to test in 1 hour intervals and then in 15-minute intervals in the last hour, verify that students have recorded their responses on the answer document or online. Tips to avoid common testing irregularities is going to be ensure that the principals, campus test coordinators, and other staff are available to support the test administrators. Account for all materials immediately upon check-in and verify student identities prior to handing them an answer document or a test ticket. And so again, I appreciate you guys. I thank you so much for all that you do. And I hope that if you have any questions that you will contact me, email me, or call me.